Okay, guys, here we are. I thought you might like that we're doing this outside today, so I'm reading for you the second chapter of the book What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20 by Tina Seelig. And the second chapter is called The Upside Down Circus. Why don't most of us view problems as opportunities in our everyday lives? Why did the teams described previously have to wait for a class assignment to stretch the limits of their imaginations? Essentially, we aren't taught to embrace problems. We're taught that problems are to be avoided or something to complain about. In fact, while speaking at a conference for business executives, I presented video clips from the innovation tournament as part of my talk. Later that afternoon, the CEO of a company approached me and lamented that he wished he could go back to school where he would be given open-ended problems and be challenged to be creative. I looked at him with confusion. I'm pretty confident that every day he faces real-life challenges that would benefit from creative thinking. Unfortunately, he didn't see that concepts easily relate to his life and business. He viewed my assignments as something that could only happen in a controlled academic environment. Of course, that isn't and shouldn't be the case at all. We can challenge ourselves every single day. That is, we can choose to view the world through different lenses that allow us to see problems in a new light. The more we take on problems, the more confident and proficient we become at solving them. And the better able we are to see them as opportunities. Attitude is perhaps the biggest determinant of what we can accomplish. True innovators face problems directly and turn traditional assumptions on their head. A wonderful example is Jeff Hawkins, who revolutionized the way people organize their lives with the Palm Pilot. Jeff was drawn to the problem of creating small personal computers that were easily accessible to the general public. This was a grand goal, and along the way he faced an endless array of additional challenges. In fact, he admits that being an entrepreneur means constantly facing big problems and finding creative ways to tame them. Jeff's problems began at the very beginning. When Palm leased its first product, the Zoomer, it failed miserably. Instead of walking away in defeat, Jeff and his team called the customers who had purchased the Zoomer, as well as those who had purchased its rival, the Apple Newton, and asked what they had hoped it would do. The customers said they had expected the product to organize their complicated schedules, helping them integrate several calendars into one. That's when Jeff realized the Zoomer was competing much more with paper calendars than with other computer products. This surprising feedback, which contradicted his original assumptions, provided useful input for the design of the next generation product, the fabulously successful Palm Pilot. Along the way, Jeff and his team tackled the daunting problem of determining how users would enter information into the new, small device. Jeff felt it was critically important to allow people to use a pen to enter information in addition to a tiny keyboard, to make this process more natural. But handwriting recognition programs of the day weren't up to the task. So Jeff and his team created a new written language, graffiti, which was easier for the computer to recognize. There was considerable resistance inside the company to mandating the use of a new language, but Jeff was confident customers would spend a small amount of time up front in return for saving lots of time going forward. Graffiti was a radical innovation that challenged all the rules and solved a real problem. Jeff Hawkins is a perfect example of a problem solver who is willing to look at the world with a fresh eye. His most recent company, Numenta, is built around his own theories about how the brain works. Jeff spent years teaching himself neuroscience in an attempt to understand how we think, and came up with a compelling and provocative theory about how the neurocortex processes information, which he describes in his book on intelligence. With these theories in hand, Jeff decided to use his ideas as the foundation for a smarter computer that processes information like the human brain. Of course, one could argue that Jeff Hawkins is one of a kind and that we can't all develop revolutionary theories and groundbreaking inventions, but it is much more productive to see Jeff as a source of inspiration, as someone who demonstrates that problems can be solved if we give ourselves permission to look at them differently. Why don't we all focus on the opportunities that surround us each day and take full advantage of them? One project that came out of the second innovation tournament shed some light on this idea. During the tournament, participants were challenged to create as much value as possible with rubber bands. One team came up with the idea for do bands, bracelets that give people a simple incentive to do the things they often put off doing. Do bands is a clever idea inspired by a cause such as Lance Armstrong's Life Strong bracelets. Do bands have a few guiding principles. Put one around your wrist with a promise to do something. Take it off when you have completed the task. Record your success online at the Do Band's website. Each Do Band comes with a number printed on it so you can look up all the actions it has inspired. Pass the Do Band along to someone else. Do Bands give individuals an incentive to do what they wanted to do all along. In reality, a Do Band is just a rubber band, but sometimes something as simple as a rubber band is all that's needed to mobilize people to actually do something, to bridge the gap between inaction to action. The Do Bands campaign only lasted a few days, but in that short time it inspired a long list of actions. Some people called their mothers, some showed their appreciation to others by sending thank you notes, and one began a new exercise program. One participant used the Do Band as an impetus to start a summer camp. One was inspired to reach out to long-lost friends, and some donated money to charities of their choice. It's fascinating that a rubber band was all that was needed to move people to act. It's also a clear reminder that there is just a tiny switch between doing nothing and doing something, but that the two options have wildly different outcomes. I assign a simple challenge in my class using a related concept that's designed to give students experience looking at obstacles in their lives from a new perspective. I ask them to identify a problem and then pick a random object in their environment. They then need to figure out how that object will help them solve the problem. Of course, I have no notion about their personal challenges, what objects they will select, or whether they will successfully solve their problems. However, in most cases, they manage to find a way to use random objects in their environment to tackle a seemingly unrelated problem. My favorite example is a young woman who was moving from one apartment to another. She had to transport some large furniture and had no idea how to make it happen. If she couldn't move the furniture, she would have to leave it in her old apartment. She looked around her apartment and saw a case of wine that was left over from a party a few weeks earlier. Aha! She went to Craigslist, an online community bulletin board, and offered to trade the case of wine for a ride across the Bay Bridge with her furniture. Within a few hours, all of her furniture was moved. The leftover wine collecting dust in the corner had been transformed into a valuable currency. The assignment didn't turn the wine into currency, but it did give this woman the ability and motivation to see it that way. There is no limit to the size of the problems you can tackle. In fact, most of the innovation tournament projects were crafted to create social value. That is, students used the competition as an opportunity to address a significant social problem, such as saving energy, encouraging people to stay healthy, or providing community support for disabled children. The first step to solving big problems is to identify them. In the world of product design, this is called need finding. This is a skill that can be learned. In fact, it's a key component of the curriculum for the biodesign fellows at Stanford. Postgraduates who have studied engineering, medicine, and business come together for a year to identify significant needs in medicine and then design products to address them. Paul Yock, a cardiologist, inventor, and entrepreneur, runs the biodesign program. Paul believes that a well-characterized need is the DNA of an invention. In other words, if we clearly define a problem, the solution will logically present itself. The biodesign fellows spent 3 months shadowing doctors in action and identifying problems they appear to be facing. They watch carefully, talk with all of the stakeholders, including physicians, nurses, patients, and administrators, and figure out where things can be improved. They whittle a list of hundreds of needs to just a handful with the goal of picking the biggest problems they can find. After they settle on the challenge, they design and quickly build prototypes for a variety of solutions. After a focused, iterative process, they present their new product concepts to the key stakeholders to find out if they have successfully met the need. Interestingly, in many cases, those who are on the front lines are so used to the problems they experience every day that they don't even see them or can't imagine radical approaches to solving them. Paul Yock shared a story about the development of balloon angioplasty, a technique that involves inserting a balloon into an artery and expanding it so that it opens up the blocked artery. Before this breakthrough invention, most cardiologists felt that the only way to deal with clogged arteries was to do bypass surgery to remove the damaged blood vessels. This procedure requires open heart surgery, which carries substantial risks. When the balloon angioplasty procedure, which is much less dangerous and invasive, was first introduced, it was met with tremendous skepticism and resistance among physicians, especially surgeons who understood best how to treat the disease. Significant roadblocks appeared in front of pioneers of the procedure. For example, John Simpson, one of the inventors of balloon angioplasty, wound up having to leave the university to do his research at a private hospital. However, over time, the efficacy of balloon angioplasty was firmly established and became the standard of care for most patients with clogged arteries. This is a great example of a case where the status quo is so entrenched that those closest to the situation can't imagine anything different. Problem blindness applies to consumer product development as well. For example, it is well documented that automatic teller machines, ATMs, failed in focus groups where potential customers were asked if they would use a machine to deposit and withdraw money from their accounts as opposed to going into a local bank to complete the transaction with the teller. These customers couldn't imagine changing their behavior so dramatically, but in retrospect, ATM machines represented a radically new and effective improvement for personal banking, one that few of us can now imagine living without. I have experienced problem blindness myself. About 15 years ago, my husband Mike gave me a cell phone. This was long before cell phones were ubiquitous, and I had no idea I needed one. In fact, I got somewhat annoyed, thinking it was one more electronic gadget that would sit around unused. Mike urged me to try it for a week. It took me only 2 days to figure out I couldn't live without it. I was commuting at least 2 hours each day and was able to catch up with friends and colleagues during the drive. I came back to Mike with sincere appreciation for the gift and now always try to keep this story in mind when I look at new, potentially breakthrough ideas. The key to need finding is identifying and filling gaps. That is, gaps in the way people use products, gaps in the services available, and gaps in the stories they tell when interviewed about their behavior. I got a chance to talk with Michael Barry, an expert in need finding at Point Forward, and he told a terrific story about his work with Kimberly-Clark, the company that makes Kleenex, Scott paper towels, and Huggies diapers. Essentially, Kimberly-Clark was disappointed with their diaper sales relative to diaper giants such as Procter & Gamble's, who make Pampers, and brought in Michael's team to help figure out how they could improve their business. By making detailed observations on how diapers are sold, assessing the messaging on the diaper packages, and conducting interviews with parents, Michael realized that Kimberly-Clark was missing the point. They were selling diapers as though they were hazardous waste disposal devices, but parents don't view them that way. To a parent, a diaper is a way to keep their children comfortable. Dealing with diapers is part of the nurturing process. A diaper is also viewed as a piece of clothing. These observations provided a great starting point for improving how Kimberly-Clark packaged and positioned Huggies. Then, upon closer scrutiny, Michael identified an even bigger opportunity. He noticed that parents become terribly embarrassed when asked if their child is still in diapers. Bingo! This was a huge pain point for parents and for kids on the cusp of toilet training. There had to be a way to turn this around. How could a diaper become a symbol of success as opposed to failure? Michael came up with the idea for pull-ups, a cross between a diaper and an underwear. Switching from diapers to pull-ups served as a big milestone for both children and parents. A child can put on a pull-up without help and can feel proud of this accomplishment. This insight led to a $1 billion increase in annual revenue for Kimberly-Clark and allowed them to leapfrog ahead of their competition. This new product grew out of focused need finding, identification of a clear problem, and then turning it into an opportunity. In my course, I use a case study about Cirque du Soleil that gives students a chance to hone their skills at challenging assumptions. The backdrop is the 1980s, when the circus industry was in trouble. Performances were predictable and stale, the number of customers was diminishing, and animal treatment was under attack. It didn't seem like a good time to start a new circus, but that is exactly what Guy Laliberté, a street performer in Canada, decided to do. Guy started Cirque du Soleil by challenging every assumption about what a circus could be, and in doing so transformed a problem, a dying industry, into an opportunity. After showing video clips from the 1939 Marx Brothers movie At the Circus, I asked the students to uncover all the assumptions of a traditional circus: a big tent, animals, cheap tickets, barkers selling souvenirs, several acts performing at once, playful music, clowns, popcorn, strong men, flaming hoops, etc. I then asked them to turn these things upside down, to imagine the exact opposite of each one. For example, the new list would include a small tent, no animals, expensive seats, no barkers, one act performing at a time, sophisticated music, and no clowns or popcorn. They then pick the things they want to keep from the traditional circus and the things they want to change. The result is a brand new type of circus à la Cirque du Soleil. I then show them video clips from recent Cirque du Soleil performances so they can see the impact of these changes. Once we do this exercise with the circus industry, it's easy to apply to other industries and institutions, including fast food restaurants, hotels, airlines, sporting events, education, and even courtship and marriage. Once you get the hang of it, this is an easy back-of-the-envelope exercise you can use to re-evaluate all aspects of your life and career. The key is to take the time to clearly identify every assumption. This is usually the hardest part, since, as described in the case about balloon angioplasty, assumptions are sometimes so integrated into our view of the world that it's hard to see them. However, with a little practice, it becomes a useful way to look at your options in a fresh light. Some people are particularly good at identifying and challenging assumptions. In their quest to find creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems, they question the limits of what is reasonable and possible. They start their lives over in exotic locations. They take on projects that have a grand scope. They make choices that seem radical, and they carve out a new path that leads them into uncharted territory. We often watch in awe, preventing ourselves from taking the same leaps. Consider Sandra Cook, who has successfully stretched the boundaries and challenged all traditional assumptions as she crafted amazing adventures for herself. The beginning of Sandra's career snapped into place like clockwork. She earned a PhD in mathematical logic, went off to the London School of Economics to study and then teach, came back to the United States to work for the Stanford Research Institute (SRI), took a job as a consultant at Booz Allen Hamilton, and eventually headed up strategy for the communications business for Motorola. She could have continued on this path for the rest of her career, but decided to jump out of this perfectly good airplane because it was heading in the wrong direction. Sandra's passion has always been adventurous travel to wild and remote places. And she managed to squeeze exotic trips to India, Tibet, Mongolia, and Nepal into 2-week stints during her busy work schedule. But she eventually decided this wasn't enough, and so flipped her world on its head by quitting her prestigious job at Motorola in 2002 in order to travel in Afghanistan more extensively. The country was in shambles after the war began, and she wanted to help in any way she could. She got a visa, purchased an airline ticket, and went hoping to find some way to make a difference. When she got off the plane in Kabul, there were no taxis and little infrastructure in place. With some effort, she found her way to a hotel frequented by reporters from around the world and got to work contacting everyone she could to find out how she could get involved with the effort to rebuild the country. She offered to write grants, to prepare business plans, or even to sweep floors, whatever would be helpful. Sandra eventually connected with Nancy Dupree, the director of the Afghanistan Center at Kabul University. Nancy was working tirelessly to rebuild the university library and to get books into the hands of people throughout the country through their box library extension. After they got to know each other a little better, Sandra wrote a business plan for the center and was eventually asked to serve on the organization's board of directors. She is now co-president of the board and spends most of her time building awareness of and raising money for this organization. Besides her official duties, Sandra also takes on grassroots projects in Afghanistan, such as distributing pomegranate trees throughout the city of Kabul. She personally purchased 20,000 bare root trees and handed them out to families so they could start replacing trees destroyed during the war. Most people do not live comfortable lives to tackle enormous problems in far-flung lands, but in many cases, much smaller challenges seem just as daunting. For many, changing jobs or moving across town feels just as risky as traveling to an exotic location to perform relief work. It is much more comfortable to stay locked in a role that's good enough than to reach for an alternative that has a higher degree of uncertainty. Most of us are content taking small, reliable steps. We don't get very far, but we don't rock the boat either. Venture capital firms that invest in early-stage businesses pride themselves on identifying big problems and taking significant risks with the goal of tackling them. They are always scanning the horizon for the next big opportunity as opposed to looking for small problems with incremental solutions. They attempt to look into the future for challenges that are just beyond the next hill so they can invest in radically innovative approaches to meeting them head-on. A great example is Kleiner Perkins Caulfield and Byers, KPCB, a firm with a remarkable track record for predicting future challenges and investing in their solutions. They invested in biotechnology, internet commerce, and alternative energy long before these were household topics. and they anticipated the future impact of businesses such as Genentech, Sun Microsystems, Amazon, Google, Netscape, Intuit, and Electronic Arts. As Randy Komisar, a partner at KPCB, notes, being entrepreneurial means seeing the world as opportunity-rich. He and his colleagues have found that identifying and solving big problems leads to significant rewards for everyone involved. Despite the fact that one can make a profit by solving big problems, Randy stresses in his book, The Monk and the Riddle, the importance of having a zeal to solve a grand problem, as opposed to being motivated to make money. To explain the difference, he compares a missionary who passionately pursues an important cause to a mercenary whose drive is only to serve his or her own interests. By focusing on finding solutions to significant challenges with missionary-like energy, successful companies are born. This message is echoed by author Guy Kawasaki, who says it is better to make meaning than to make money. If your goal is to make meaning by trying to solve a big problem in innovative ways, you are more likely to make money than if you start with the goal of making money, in which case you will probably not make money or meaning. What do the entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and inventors described above have to do with the students who started with $5, paper clips, or water bottles and were challenged to create as much value as possible? A tremendous amount. All of these examples reinforce the idea that there is a great benefit to identifying problems in your midst and then relentlessly working to solve them by challenging traditional assumptions. Problems are abundant, just waiting for those willing to find inventive solutions. This takes acute observation, coordinated teamwork, the ability to execute a plan, a willingness to learn from failure, and creative problem solving. But the first requirement is having the attitude that the problem can be solved. I have found for myself and my students that the more experience you have tackling problems, the more confident you become that you can find a solution. I was recently in Scotland teaching in a week-long entrepreneurship boot camp run by James Barlow at the Scottish Institute for Enterprise for 50 college students from across the country who were studying a wide range of disciplines from criminology to cosmetics. Most of them had no exposure to entrepreneurship at all. At the beginning of the week, many were completely overwhelmed by the first assignment, which required them to come up with and then sell a new product or service. Each team was given 50 British pounds of starting capital at 6 p.m. and had a total of 18 hours to complete the project. The goal was to get them out of their comfort zone and into the real world. Many of the students told me they were on the verge of going home. They didn't need to tell me this because the panicked looks on their faces said it all, but they all stuck with it and were pleasantly shocked by what they accomplished. One group became umbrella walkers, assisting those who got caught in the unexpected rain. One group set up an impromptu speed dating station at a local bar, and one started a makeshift shoe shine stand on a busy downtown street. Oops. Little catty. Do you want to see the cat? Wait. How can I make this happen? Oh, this way. Meow. Okay. Let's get back to the book. Where did I start? Finish here. But this assignment was just the beginning of their experience. By the end of a week's worth of challenging activities, including scoring newspapers to identify problems, brainstorming to come up with creative solutions, designing new ventures, meeting with potential customers, filming commercials, and pitching their ideas to a panel of successful executives, they were ready to take on just about any challenge. One team that stands out in my mind was composed of 3 young women for whom all of this was brand new. They were shaking in their shoes when the first assignment was given. By the end of the week, however, they had come up with a fabulous idea that earned high praise from the panel of judges as well as seed funding from investors. They developed a mobile, at-home service for bra fitting based on their observation that most women are embarrassed by the process and often end up with ill-fitting bras. Their video commercial was tasteful and convinced everyone that this was an interesting opportunity. On the last day of the workshop, one of the young women said to me, "I now know that there isn't anything I can't do." She, along with all the other students, already had the bulk of the skills they needed to accomplish amazing things. All we offered them was tangible proof, along with a healthy dose of permission that they could turn the problems around them into opportunities. All right, guys, that's it for today. The kitty cat listened to me. I hope you also made it to the end. Have a great day.